This has given me an opportunity to get out of the routine of professional work, look into subjects like the Arthashastra, which I hold very close to my heart. And it's been my great good fortune to have been guided by gurus like late Shri Piyush Kant Dikshitji, who has initiated me to the study of Tarkashastram or Nyayashastram. And we have been receiving inspiration and guidance and encouragement from great scholars like Srinivasan ji, whom we just heard. And he also has been a great source of knowledge in our discussions in the Vitakshara study group. So as part of today's seminar, I would like to share with all of you some of my readings, some of my understandings as we have been progressing through a deeper reading of the Arthashastram of Kautilya. I'll start today's presentation with a shloka, just because I got inspired by what Srinivasan ji just spoke about. This is a Mangala shloka in the Panchatantram of Vishnu Sharma, and it starts as Manave Vachaspataye Shukraya Parasharaya Sasutaya Chanakyaya cha Vidushe Namostu Naya Shastra Kartrubhya. So it says, so all of these names are considered in one breath. These are the great torch bearers of the traditions of Naya Shastra, or the knowledge of how one should live, how one should organize a society, how the social contract has to be understood in the context of, especially in the context of Bharat. So first name taken is Manu. We talked about the Manavas. Then Vachaspati, who is no other than Brihaspati. Shukra, Ushanas. Parashara, we all know. Sasutaya, that is Vedavyasa, the author of the Mahabharatas and the Puranas. Chanakyaya. So all of these names are taken in the same breath. The point being that Manu is strongly associated with the Dharma Shastram, as the Manu Smriti, various other Smritis that followed after him, Yajnavalkya Smriti. We have Brihaspati, who is also an author or acknowledged to be one of the torchbearers in Arthashastram as well as Dharma Shastram. We have Shukra, who has also written an Arthashastra, Dharma Shastra. So the point that I'm making is that these subjects are fairly intertwined. There is a intertwining between Arthashastra and Dharma Shastra, and that I will begin today's, I had intended to take you through a presentation. If not, I'll just continue with what I have here. The first point is relevance. So that's the topic that we are looking at today. What is the contemporary relevance of the Arthashastra? Should we look at it as a text possibly written around 2000, 2100, 2200 years ago, and just look at it from as a sort of as a reflection of the past? Is that what we should look at? Or my suggestion or my understanding and my proposition today is that it has to be understood as a timeless work. It does not have a time stamp, it does not have an expiry date, it does not have a best by date. It is a reflection of the aspirations of the best form of social organizations that can take place for the benefit of the locals of this land, because each land has its own special requirements, special characteristics. In our land, we have special requirements, as in we have a land that is very suitable for human population, as a result of which over a period of time, not now, in the past, it has been a factor that has to be considered. We have been a land which has been densely populated. So we have dense population pressures. We have resources, we have sufficient resources, but those resources had to be shared amongst this large competing sets of population. We have been populated for an extended period of time. So therefore, there have been long traditions. We have jati traditions, we have jati allegiances, etc. that stretch into anadi kalas. So we have the sense of what is a jati, etc. So all of these, each of these jati communities, which are relevant even in today's politics, have their own worldview. So they have a sense of what is their dharma, etc. And all of them have to be accommodated within these confined land masses, confined resources. So we have competing requirements, they have to be accommodated, and we have a dense population. We have a rich land which is suitable for human population. We have rivers flowing through it. We have sufficient rainfall. We have arable land. With all of this, there are specific, unique challenges that have been remaining in this land. That is my understanding. And it is not something, and solutions, especially in an Atma-nirbhara manner, which has been spoken about some time ago, have a unique outcome. That is my understanding. So therefore, when you have a population here which is left to fend for itself, which is not influenced by other colonial or exploitative forces, it would reach its own equilibrium. It has its equilibrium. It would reach a position of rest, which is most meaningful for the population, the members of the population in the land here. And that, I believe, is what has been represented in texts like the Dharmashastram and Arthashastram, and which I believe is still something that is relevant today, because in the present political situation also, when we go through the Arthashastram texts or the Dharmashastram texts, we find that there are reflections of those aspirations even in today's world, when we look at the expectation that we need to have a welfare state, something that has even the founding fathers of our constitution in the present era have found necessary to include as the overlying background of how the state has to be organized. We need a welfare state. If you look at the way politics in our country is presently also progressing, there is an expectation of a paternal figure, somebody who looks to the welfare of the people. People look up to that kind of a leadership position in society. There is an expectation that the society and the governing dispensation has to have a Dina Bandhu. It should look at the weaker sections, and that is expected. If we don't have only the strong will survive, survival of the fittest kind of model is not reflected even in the present political discussions. So therefore, all of these, we find the expectation of a paternalistic figure, the expectation of accommodating these various competing jati identities which have developed over centuries, if not millennia of continuous inhabitation in this country, population pressures, the need to have a welfare state. All of these had been themes which have been present in the land, in the political landscape, and that has been reflected in the Arthashastram, and we will do well to have a look at what is mentioned there and how we can learn, or rather get inspired from these provisions that have been provided. And many of the problems that are facing us could possibly have solutions here. And today, of course, we are discussing primarily about the public administration aspect of the Arthashastram and what we can learn from that. So now coming to Arthashastram and Dharmashastram, since our academic study in our group has been largely focused on Dharmashastram with a look on how Arthashastram can be benefited from the vision of the Dharmashastram. So what I would just like to bring in the Dharmashastram aspect also here. One is that both are supposed to be complementary. So Dharmashastram, Arthashastram. If you read Kautilya's Arthashastram, he says Dharma should give weight for Artha. If you read Yajnavalkya Smriti or the Mitakshara commentary, they would say that Artha should give way to Dharma. So therefore, what is right and wrong in a larger sense, which extends beyond the present world. The other worlds are also Punya, Papa, the Adrishta, and what adheres to the Atma even beyond this particular existence, this corporeal existence, that would be dealt with by Dharma, what is right and wrong, for example. Artha is Arthashastram, by and large, reading the Kautilya Arthashastram, is largely much more practical, material, something that we would a larger section of the population here today would identify with. And interestingly, it is this Arthashastram which has drawn commentators, both from the Jaina, Buddha, Nastika Paramparas have also contributed greatly to the understanding and the expansion of the Arthashastram provisions. And if you read it, it definitely reads to be much more practical and grounded in terms of material. It doesn't talk about the larger questions that the Dharmashastram deals with. But what I do propose, and what I generally see from the reading both Dharmashastram and Arthashastram, is they represent learnings in our land over millennia. For example, as Sir mentioned, even when Chanakya talks about his Arthashastram, he talks about having learnt from the viewpoints of various other previous scholars like Brihaspati, Ushanasa, Kaunapadanta, etc. All of these people have contributed. There have been these traditions going on, and those traditions continue to be with us. So this represents a knowledge base which talks about how our people have figured out unique, meaningful solutions for existence in an Atma-nirbhar state, in a state where we are not colonized, in a state we are in a state of free governance, Swatantra state. And in that state, what kind of solutions have found root in the land and led to prosperity, because we've been looking at periods of prosperity. When we talk about the golden period, we talk about Ashoka, Chandragupta, that particular lineage. Then we talk about the Guptas. Then we talk about Vikramaditya who came. And we also talk about the Chalukyas, Vijayanagaras. All of them have been inspired by a certain worldview, understanding how this land and this population can be harnessed to bring prosperity to the masses in a meaningful manner. And which is why I feel it definitely has a contemporary reason. We have a contemporary aspect of the Dharmashastram and Arthashastram traditions. So before continuing, of course, I'll like to take you through what has resonated with me, because during my readings of various Dharmashastram and Arthashastram texts, this is one particular shloka which I found in the Shanti Parva of the Mahabharata. The shloka and adhyaya numbers are mentioned here. After a long discussion of what is dharma and for example, the Vedic dharma which talks about yajnas, etc., is it really ahimsa, or is it really something that would be meaningful? After examining it from various perspectives, eventually a discussion between two learned persons in the Shanti Parva has reached this interesting outcome, which sort of definitely resonated with me. It is yadanyair vihitam neched atmanah karma purushaha natat pareshu kurvita janan apriyam atmanaha. So what we expect others not to do unto us, we should not do unto others. That's a simple way of checking whether we are on the path of dharma or adharma. That's a simple, quick test to see whether what is being conducted is dharma or adharma. And interestingly, the living traditions of Dharmashastram are much more visible, because even when the British came here in 1850, even though we had a period of Central Asian colonial rule, people from Uzbekistan, etc., coming over from Samarkand, etc., having their colonial influences over the subcontinent, the underlying traditions of Dharmashastra were continuing. That is, when the British came, they found that land disputes, because even today, if you look at the Indian judicial system, we talk about case pendency and so many crores of cases pending, etc., 75 to 85% of all the cases relate to family disputes and land disputes. That is the primary choking sort of the case load that is there even in the present system, and it is those disputes that have to be dealt with in a meaningful manner. And all of these land disputes, which are considered to be civil disputes today, were primarily being dealt with by village-based arbitrators. There were arbitrators in the villages, and they would apply traditions of Dharmashastram. So they would look at the interpretation of Mitakshara, look at the Yagyavalkya Smriti on a village-to-village basis. That is how these land disputes would have been settled when the British came, which is why the British also adopted Mitakshara, the Mitakshara view, which was found to be prevalent except for the Jimuta Vahana's Daya Vibhaga text in Bengal and Assam. The rest of India had by then settled into the Mitakshara worldview, which is how a family has to organize itself. Family is the root of a society, and if families are well organized, dispute-free, society becomes productive. And that was the goose that was laying golden eggs for all the colonial conquerors for a large number of centuries, and they were not disturbing that, because though that structure was allowed to prevail, because that was what was generating wealth from the land. After all, land is just mud and earth. From this earth, wealth was being generated in huge quantities, which is what was attracting all these people from across the world to come here and try to exploit it to the extent possible. And those traditions actually continued, because we didn't have the British didn't interfere with the statutory provision. They had Contract Act, they had the Evidence Act, but they didn't get into the family provisions. They let the family legal provisions continue as they had found it, because they found that it is working. Why fix something that isn't broken? But eventually, of course, in 1956, it is only post-independence that we had the Hindu Succession Act and various other provisions by which the Mitakshara and other ongoing Dharmashastra traditions were bypassed. So by now, right from 1956 to 2025, the last 70 years or so, 75 years, we have largely started forgetting those traditions, because now we go to court, we look at the provisions of the Hindu Succession Act and not at the Mitakshara provisions, for example. So the reason I'm mentioning it is that the Dharmashastra provision, which impact day-to-day life of people, were alive post-independence up to 1956, which is why they appear to be more familiar. The texts were still there. If there is a dispute within a family with regard to land or partitioning, etc., people would still look to the Mitakshara tradition till 1956. It is only post 1956 that we were forced to let that aside and look only at the statutes, which also eventually actually borrows from the Mitakshara traditions, including the first class, second class, heirs, etc. The principles come from there, but we stopped reading the texts. We are now only concerned with the statutes. So that is the reason why Dharma Shastram appears to be still fresh, it's still warm. Whereas Arthashastram traditions, over a period of time, they had, because of political backing not being there, the principles were not as strongly maintained. And as Sir mentioned, for nearly 1,000-year period, we didn't have what was the definitive text of Kautilya's Arthashastram till it was rediscovered by Pandit Shama Shastri around just around 120 years ago. But the point is, the Dharma Shastram, one of the reasons why it stayed alive, and I believe that applies to Arthashastram also, is because of this concept, again taken from the Shanti Parva of Mahabharatam, this approach of Ardhanashe Samutpanne, Hyardham Tyajati Panditaha, Ardhanashe Samutpanne, Sarvam Tyajati Durmatihi. So if you find some portion of the Dharma Shastram is not in accordance with your Desha or Kala, and your local sensibilities don't permit certain provisions of the Dharma Shastra to be accepted today, you can leave out that portion, surgically remove those portions, which is done even in statutory interpretation, and retain what is meaningful. There is a good portion that is still meaningful, that carries the memory of our ancestors over thousands of years, and that is what a Pandita would do. Ardhanashe Samutpanne Hyardham Tyajati Panditaha. He will leave half and retain the other half. Whereas a Durmati, a prejudiced mind, will throw out the baby with the bathwater and sort of lose the entire tradition of thousands of years, and every time reinvent the wheel and be condemned to whatever the learning process involves, failures, etc. So one interesting aspect before I get into the Arthashastram part, which I'll be talking about, is another aspect of the Dharma Shastram, which of course again I found resonating with me, is the second shloka of the Yajnavalkya Smriti, which is Mithilasthas Sayogindraha Kshanam Dhyatva Bravin Munin Yasmin Deshe Mrugah Krishnaha Tasmin Dharman Nibodhata. The point being, there are 2-3 interesting aspects. So where does this dharma apply? Do the dharmas of the Dharma Shastram, which have been encapsulated in the Yajnavalkya Smriti, do they apply to the whole world? Is it a common, universal, human dharma, for example? He says no, because each land will have its own limitations, special requirements, etc. A desert or an icy land would have its own requirements, depending on the people, the population density, carrying capacity of the land, etc. So here we have a situation where for this land, where the Mrugah Krishna, where the black buck is freely roaming, that is the land where this dharma applies. That is the shloka of Yajnavalkya Smriti. Interestingly, the black buck is endemic to the Indian subcontinent. So not only that does he have a knowledge of where, there is a geographical and knowledge of the wildlife, etc. And it is an extremely vulnerable species. So it is only a population of people who have the high thinking of looking at protecting species, etc., dharma, etc. That sense of dharma that looks into even the speechless creatures, what to talk about disadvantaged human beings. It is only that dharma where these shlokas of the Yajnavalkya Smriti would resonate with. That was his understanding even at that point of time. Interestingly, at the time of independence, that is around 1945 or so, 1947, at the time of independence, we had huge herds of black buck roaming in the country. There would be herds of 5,000 black bucks. That is the kind of, so if they were hunted, they wouldn't exist like that. So the people had a great reverence, just as we talk about the Gomata, etc. There was a great reverence towards these kind of vulnerable species, and there were huge herds of black buck were roaming. Interestingly, if you correlate dharma with black buck, today, it is an endangered species in India. So that gives you a sense of how dharma and how the mindset of people is, and how a marker species which was identified by Yajnavalkya has become now, it has become extinct in Pakistan and Bangladesh. So it is extinct in Pakistan and Bangladesh and highly endangered in India today. So that gives you... Yeah, correct. They take it up as their sort of a life goal to ensure that the black buck is sort of protected. That's, of course, people still... propagation? We have, of course... So therefore, the dharma correlation to a vulnerable species like the black buck. Now, of course, coming to arthashastra. So therefore, there is a correlation and there is a sort of a relation between arthashastram, dharmashastram. As we just saw, Shama Shastri discovered what is we have as a text that we follow now. It was discovered along with the Malayalam commentary. It was, I think, discovered in Kerala. And after that, there have been scholars, great scholars, because the text as such, as Sir mentioned, is sutra with commentary by Chanakya himself. Even the text, the Vyakhyana by Chanakya is not readable. It's not readable like our other texts because, one, the traditions had been lost for many hundreds of years. There are many technical words, extremely technical words, which we might not even be able to understand today in terms of administration, in terms of day-to-day use, etc. And unlike Dharmashastras, traditions which continued unbroken for all till 1850s, till our independence, etc. Arthashastras traditions also, the academic traditions are broken. So it is not easy to read and understand what the text also reads, what it's trying to imply. So there have been, at least we are fortunate, we are standing on the shoulders of great scholars. We have, of course, Ganapati Shastri, who took it upon himself to create an authentic Sanskrit commentary, which covers the entire text. So he has relied, of course, on the Malayalam commentary, which looks into a lot of the technical words. He has extrapolated that into Sanskritam. Fortunately, Malayalam and Sanskritam have a lot of similarity in terms of the word usage, etc. Then we have had, of course, like Professor Kangle from Maharashtra, who has given a definitive English text. Shama Shastri himself has given an English text. And later on, of course, I feel most indebted to Panditaraj Rajeshwara Shastri Dravid of Kashi, because he formed a Vidvat Mandali of around 20-25 scholars for around 20-25 years, around 1970s. They traveled across the country giving lectures on Arthashastram. They developed an understanding of how it could be made meaningfully relevant to the present context. And he has expanded upon that in the Vedanta Siddhanta Samrakshani commentary. Unfortunately, this commentary only relates to the first Adhikaranam. Out of the 15 Adhikaranams, he could only complete the first Adhikaranam during his lifetime, and sort of that work remains incomplete, but it gives a good direction to see how to read the text as such. So as Srinivasanji mentioned, the Arthashastram has primarily 15 Adhikaranams. So out of 15 Adhikaranams, there are again 3 subdivisions. There is the Tantra portion, the Avapa portion, and there are 2 Parishishta portions. So the Tantra portion has 5 Adhikaranams, that is Vinaya Adhikarika, Adhyaksha Prachara, Dharmasthya, Kantaka Shodhana, and Yoga Vritta, which talk about how a nation, a state, how a ruler, and I interpret it to be a chief executive of a population, has to function to ensure that his population is well taken care of. Avapa talks about the next 8 Adhikaranas talk about how he has to relate to other states, because nobody is an island, and we are aware that we live in a committee of sort of a larger world, and we have to look out to how that larger world interacts with us and how we have to interact with the larger world, because if eventually value is created through import, export, financial value, and we have to know how to leverage our strengths and try to reduce that's a reality that we are facing even today. So therefore, these contemporary aspects of how to interpret the world, country, Tantra, Avapa, and the Aupanishadakam and the Tantra Yukti portions. So these are the larger structure of the Dharmashastram. Focusing further, I would like to think that there is a greater correlation to what we understand today as political science, etc. The first 3 Adhikaranams give us a great amount of information with regard to how a state can be organized. First is Vinayadhikarikam, then Adhyaksha Prachara, and Dharmasthya. So these are, even today we talk about the 3 pillars, legislative, executive, and the judiciary. Interestingly, when you read the Dharmashastram and the Arthashastram, it is very clear that there is this kind of triumvirate is not really considered in the strict sense. Everything rests on, the buck stops at one person's place, that is executive. So the executive is all powerful. Executive can appoint the judiciary, and executive, of course, also promulgates the laws. So that is a kind of structure, which we find in even various successful countries even today. Even today, if you go to the United States, which is considered to be a fairly successfully organized country, the executive has a power to even appoint the judges. You don't have this collegium system. Of course, the present Chief Justice has again agreed to reopen that aspect now. But the fact is, the executive is empowered, and to the extent that he has to answer for his actions as well. So so with power comes responsibility. Today, sometimes splitting of the power can also lead to breakup of responsibility, and you end up having nobody to blame for a chaotic situation that we might find ourselves in. So therefore, definitely there is an empowered executive that is considered. Vinayadhikarikam talks about the ruler, how a ruler has to be appointed, what are the qualities that a ruler should possess, ruler or a chief executive, and how he has to be educated and brought to that level. So there is a process of ensuring that the sort of a suitable person from the population can become the chief executive of the population. And as Sir mentioned, the Trai, the Vidya Sthapana, etc., are all going into his formative period to ensure that we have somebody who has a worldview, who is able to understand dharma, artha, kama. These are the expectations of individuals. There might be different levels of expectations in different people. Some people might focus on dharma, some on artha, some on kama, some on moksha. But these are the four broad categories into which the expectations of people are divided, and to ensure that the facility in the social structure can provide them each as per his wish the expected outcomes. So as also Sir mentioned, the primary focus of the Raja or the ruler has to be that Matsya Nyaya, might is right, that should be avoided. Danda is a primary force of enforcement, and where Rajeshwar Shastri Dravidji has clarified in his commentary also that Danda does not mean only Danda, it is a representation of Sama Bheda and Samadana Bheda Danda. So all four are considered to be part of Danda as such. And so and Danda Niti or Arthashastram is the means of enforcing a sense of righteousness in society. So therefore, when we have out of the three Adhikaranams, Vinayadhikarakam, Adhyaksha Prachara. So Vinayadhikarakam talks about how the ruler has to be. He is the linchpin of the social or the political structure, how he has to be, what mindset he has to have. And then the Adhyaksha Prachara, how his bureaucracy or the public administration system has to be organized by him in the society. Eventually, Dharmasthiyam, how these laws are to be enforced. The jurisprudence aspect is dealt with in the third Adhikarana. So again, coming here, the apex, so therefore there is a great deal of, if you look at the krama of the Shastram also, the first focus is on the ruler, how his physical self has to be protected. There is also an interesting outcome that is coming out of the reading of the Arthashastram, is that even today, the state is not a physical entity, it is not a geographical entity. When you don't know where India ends and Pakistan starts, if you go and walk on the ground, for example. It is eventually all the concept of a state, of a country, is in the mind. It is in the mind of people. So it's what we believe in that matters. And the primary locus of the state is in the mind of the ruler. That aspect comes out clearly from the Arthashastram. So the ruler has to have the greatest sense of conviction that this is a state, this is my jurisdiction, I have to protect and take care of the interests of these people here. And that is then reflected in the people's minds. So therefore, the locus of the existence of the state is in the intellect, in the consciousness of the ruler. And from there, how does he get knowledge of the state? His jnanendriyas for the state are like his gudha purushas, the spies, etc. So there is a great deal of focus there in the first Adhikaranam. How does he act? He needs mantri, amatyas. He needs the amatya purushotpatti. They become his karmendriyas. So eventually the state itself becomes the broader extension of the persona of the ruler. So therefore the ruler identifies with the state, state identifies with the ruler, and that to a large extent we find even today, the way politics is there. You expect a chief ministerial candidate or a prime ministerial candidate, you need individual centric, and that seems to be the way things are moving even in a democratic structure. So it's not something that is incompatible even with our current structure, that kind of a thinking. So now coming to the second Adhikaranam, which is going to be the focus of public administration, there is a greater sense of going into the nitty-gritty of how a public administration system has to be organized in terms of the successful organization of a state. So as Sir said, Manushyavati Bhumi is Artha. That is the primary definition of Artha. A state, a land that can host a population, that has to be further organized. Resources have to be identified. What are the available resources? You can have different resources available in different states. We have to see what we can leverage best. Do we have, in today's context, do we have oil? Do we have agricultural produce? Do we have manpower? Do we have service? Say, a country like Singapore has recognized that in the geographical framework, it has a strategic point. Setting up a deep water port there became its point of leveraging its whatever advantage it had. Different countries do so. I mean, the Middle Eastern countries, probably where they're oil-rich countries, they look at oil as their strategic advantage. Different countries look at how they can leverage their individual strategic advantages. So those have to be, resources have to be identified. Markets have to be facilitated. Trading is important, so therefore market only if you have a place where people can buy your produce in a safe and reliable manner. So those markets have to be facilitated. Infrastructure and transportation have to be maintained. That is all. Detailed chapters focusing on these aspects. Law and order has to be maintained. And for all this, the ruler has a right to levy tax. So therefore, the ruler does not own the land. The view in Arthashastra is the ruler does not, the land doesn't belong to him. Land is still privately owned by individuals. The right to collect tax from the land is what is identified as the power of the ruler. And if he can ensure that there are systems in place which allow him to collect tax in a meaningful manner, collect more tax because the more wealth is generated in the land, that makes him more, that incentivizes him. So there is a cross incentive in that aspect. Of course, eventually the ruler has to look at the dharma, artha, kama, moksha of the individuals. The Adhyaksha Prachara, which is the second Adhikaranam, has 38 prakaranams. As sir mentioned, there are around 150 odd prakaranams in the entire Arthashastram. And this, out of 15 Adhikaranams, this takes a bulk of the discussion. So this particular aspect, Adhyaksha Prachara. So essentially, my understanding is that there are profit centers, power centers, and critical nodes of society have been identified, and which is applicable even today. And those critical nodes need special administration. Those resources which are crucial to the state and the functioning of a meaningful society have to be identified. Persons with integrity have to be sort of appointed to man those positions of administration. That's public administration today. Unlike what our understanding is today, that we are better off with generalists in these positions, my understanding from the reading of the Arthashastram is that specialists are preferred. So agriculture, have a specialist in agriculture. Mining, have a person who has special knowledge of mining. For factories, special knowledge of factories. Textiles, special knowledge of textiles. So specialists seem to be preferred over generalists. So that's one learning that comes out from the Arthashastram. And all of them act as the representative of the chief executive. So they are all extensions of the ruler as such. And there is a deep description of the roles. So all of this makes a study of this Adhyaksha Prachara especially meaningful in the contemporary understanding of public administration. So as sir mentioned, Janapada, because eventually we are looking at revenue creation. And interestingly, as today we think of the holy cow as being untouchable or agriculture as being untouchable, both cattle rearing and agriculture were subject to taxation, because that is a primary. And it comes out from a reading from the Arthashastram. Unless you get taxable revenue from any source of your country's economy, you are not going to start investing in it. So if a state is not getting taxation from agriculture, the amount of investment it would put, focused investment to say irrigation or various other factors that could help agriculture, is not going to happen. It's going to have a little bit of a charity-based perspective, and that, of course, it's also reflected in the present context also. If you look at it, our productivity, per acre productivity, is one of the lowest in the world, because it's really not been the focus of the administration, because it is not generating revenue that is measurable. Whereas Janapadas, where you have the Sthaniyam, Dronamukham, Karvatikam, etc., these are 200, 400, 800 villages. These are all taxable revenue generating centers of the country. And once these are taxable, and it was taxable even when the British came here, the post of the collector itself was for collecting tax. They only took over what was there with the zamindars, etc., from the Mughal period and what existed even before that. So therefore, agriculture seems to have been taxable throughout our history. It is only now that we are in an anomalous situation, and that probably is also resulting in certain, the productivity, etc. of agriculture being impacted because of the fact that it doesn't get the necessary attention today. So, agriculture as a tax source, and interestingly, the land, as Sir also mentioned, he has to give the land to people who are productive. If it is found that a person does not really take charge of the land, makes it productive, etc., he can be dispossessed, it can be handed over to somebody else. And Dharmashastram also says, if for 5 years, if you don't touch a land, without ploughing, without taking care of the agricultural needs of a land, it becomes a vanam. It says, in 2 years it reaches a particular state, 3 years it reaches a particular state, in 5 years, and you go around Tamil Nadu today, where agriculture is slowly ebbing, you see entire acres, hundreds of acres taken over by lantana today. Not lantana, it will be the acacia. So in Tamil Nadu, you find acacia everywhere because it has become the forest. And now again, getting that land back for agriculture is going to be a Bhishma Prayatna. You have to remove all those thorny plants, again start irrigating and sort of tilling it. So therefore, continuous productive use of land is something that the state has to look out for. And because its eye is on the target of revenue generation, it becomes a point of interest and it is not left ignored or wallowed. Similarly, there is also Bhumi Chidra Vidhanam, where it talks, where if there is any barren land, how it can be put to alternate use. So there is a focus on revenue generation. Useful arable land, yes. Apparently unusable, non-arable land, look for other sources of revenue generation, so that the entire land and the population is meaningfully occupied in revenue generation for themselves and for the state. So lakes, for example, in Kanchipuram district, we know we have a history of kings or rulers intervening and building all the tanks that today, of course, we take for granted and we don't maintain to the extent that we should. But those were all created at a particular point of time. There was a mindset, and that mindset is reflected in texts like the Arthashastra, where put everything to meaningful, productive use. And so the Samaharta is one of the people who is like more of a revenue officer. He is in charge of the tax generation, and so there have been around 7-8 areas where he can generate tax revenue for the state. Everything is countable, measurable, and quantifiable. So Durga, my understanding from what I've read here is, it is, even today when you look at our traditional cities, they are around a fort. So if you go to Bombay or any of course even the British cities have been built around forts, including our own city here. Even traditionally you had the fort area, which is the protected area, which has the primary market. So because these markets have to be protected, there is full facilitation given in the markets, and it is those markets which become the center of trading. Because you bring your goods here, you are rest assured that there is security there. If you trade there, your contracts will be enforceable. And so with those kind of mindsets, the Durga became the primary area of trading activity, etc. So these are the various aspects of the Durga. Then you have the Rashtram. The Rashtram is the next level, the hinterland, where you have the agriculture and other activity going on. You have the Khani, which is the mines, Setu, which is water management, Vanam, forests, Vrajam, cattle rearing, and Vanikpatha, which are trading routes. So all of these, so even traveling on the trading routes, if you are ensured that you will have an incident-free transit from point A to point B, you pay for it. Nothing comes free. And if you pay for it, and I am taking care of the transit, despite your payment, if you lose, if there is a forest or brigandry or a robbery that happens, I as the ruler have the obligation to make good. So there is an insurance also that comes with it. So there is, today what to talk about transit insurance, etc. That insurance aspect is included in the fee paid to the state. So those aspects come out very clearly from the Arthashastram. There are checks and balances. There is an accounting system on a regular basis. Income tax is considered the NEVI, the balancing of the state accounts. And we see, so each profit center, each Adhyaksha is given a task of improving the revenues of the state. So it says, Aparadham sahet alpam tushyed alpe pichodaye mahopakaram chadhyaksham pragrahena abhipojayet. So if a particular administrator, he makes small errors and there are losses in his department, that can be accepted. I mean, don't hound everybody for every small loss. That is not the way a state has to be run. If there are small gains, recognize those small gains. If somebody makes exceptional gains, that should be that should have the, that should lead to exemplification. So therefore, that person ought to be marked out for special honors, etc., so that there is an incentive to grow amongst the committee of administrators also. So, evam kuryad samudayam vruddhim chayasya darshayet hrasam yajasya cha prajnah sadhayet cha viparjaya. So, king's focus should be on increasing profits, reducing expenses, so that overall the country, that's how we run a family also. We try to increase our income, reduce our expenditure, and that same focus has to be in the way a state has to be run. So, these are the sources of income. And then there is also the beginning of this chapter, before going into the details of how it has to be run, it is accepted that there will be officers who will misappropriate funds. And how that misappropriation has to be identified. In fact, there are 40 types of misappropriation. It is a science by itself. How a person, how he can fudge the books. He has given grant to somebody, he has given 50 rupees, entered 100 rupees in his book. Whatever you can think of, I'm sure it's sort of, people don't have to extend their imagination too much for that. So that happens, and there are 40 different types of such misappropriations that are recorded in this particular chapter, and those have to be identified. And there are informers. Today we talk about whistleblowers, etc. So whistleblowers concept is there. You reward an informer if his information turns out to be correct, information on corruption. And interestingly, the word used for corruption in Arthashastram is lancha, which is still used in Tamil today. Lanjam. So the word is, it has a Arthashastram. So some usage that we have today, the lancha is used here in the Arthashastram. And if a lancha is discovered, or a lancha is, the whistleblower comes with a credible information, he is to be rewarded. Of course, the corollary is also true. If his information turns out to be false, and if he is sort of wrongly insinuating an officer, a public officer, he is also liable to be punished. If he changes his statement, which is very common in courts today, we have witnesses who are hostile witnesses. Hostile witnesses also have to be strongly, and that is dealt with in Dharmashastram in great detail. And interestingly, at the end of all these discussions about how water type, in fact, it recognizes that if a person directly takes money, that is, he directly sort of puts his hand into the state funds, that is one corruption. If you don't tax sufficiently by laziness, for example, if you don't do your work properly, there are taxable resources available, you don't facilitate the activities and don't tax them, that is one source of lower income for the state. If you overtax, and that leads to disincentivizing people, if you become overzealous in your actions, that is also a negative attribute. And at the end, so from this understanding, what comes out is that there is a continuous period of probation. So there is no fixed job, no government job. Today, everybody is sort of thinking of a government job. Probation goes on through the career. And if any time there is a lack of probity that can be cause for removal, only those people are tenured. At the last line, as it mentioned, those who have proved not only incorruptibility, but also productivity. So merely being na khaunga, na khane dunga, that is not sufficient. You have to also increase the value of this, of whichever department you are working on. So both increase in productivity and being incorruptible, that is the hallmark of an officer who can be eventually instated in the permanent commission, so to say. And there is no guarantee of a job in the government. There is a constant, very interesting methods of also dealing with probity or lack of probity are mentioned. So what this shlokam is sort of interesting. It says, Yatha hyanasvadayatum nashakyam jikhva talastham madhuva vishamva arthas tatha hyartha harena rajnyaha svalpopyanasvadayatum nashakya. Just as if you put honey in your tongue, you cannot escape tasting the sweetness of the honey. You can't. So therefore, an officer who is dealing with public funds, that attraction of the lucre will, it is difficult to expect that he will not be sort of attracted to sort of put in his hand a little bit and sort of appropriate some of it or misappropriate some of it. So that there's a realistic viewpoint to that. So therefore, with that, the next shloka, na bhakshayanti yetvarthan nyayato vardhayanti cha nityadhikara karyaste rajnyah priyahite rataha. So those who do not eat from the state funds and who also vardhayanti, who also increase the value of the state treasury, those people are those who can be eventually made permanent commission officers, so to say, and their tenure is, and they become part of the permanent cadre, so to say. So there is no guarantee of permanent cadre within a 1.5 year probation as we are used to today. Now, of course, I'll give few examples before closing. There are some interesting aspects of different officers. There are nearly 40 officers mentioned here. I only mentioned some of them. One is the Koshagaradhyaksha, food security. So taxation brings food grains. Usually 1/6 of the produce, etc., directly comes to the treasury. And that granary has to be taken care of. Food has to be stored, circulated, ensured it is not wasted. And food is spent to incentivize people to sort of get value out of whatever food is there. So you pay people who are doing labor which is meaningful. And that becomes the lookout of the Koshagaradhyaksha, reduce wastes, methods of preservation of various food products, of vegetables, fruits, etc., how they can be preserved for a longer period. A lot of technical aspects are also dealt with here. Then you have the Panyadhyaksha, who deals with commerce. And there it comes out very clearly that the effort of the state through the Panyagaradhyaksha has to be to facilitate individual enterprise. So they have to provide the various infrastructure, market. So eventually, as sir mentioned, there is a free market, but it is regulated market. There is a regulation, strict amount of regulations come there. And typically taxation for access to protected markets, where you have a guarantee of your contracts being honored, you have guarantee of your goods being protected, and you have other aspects that are made there. That is nearly around 1/16 of the trade, and that has to be accounted for every day. And interestingly, there is a focus, and this makes sense even in India's case or in any country's case. If you have any monopolistic control over any resource, for example, China has control over rare earth, whatever, magnets, etc., you create a single market for that, because then you can control the price. You don't have multiple markets where you lose control of the transactions. So wherever you have monopolistic control over any resource in your country, you have a single market. But whereas for imported products, you have multiple markets. So you try to do more price discovery in imported items, and less price discovery options are given in internal products, export markets, export items. So that's an interesting outcome that comes out of how we have to strategize for improving the imbalance of trade that comes out of a nation's export and import activity. Then the Kupyadhyaksha is mines and forest produce. There is a value in seeking to preserve wild spaces, because it is accepted that not everything we can do with our own application of mind. We can't grow all type of aushadhis, etc. Some have to come from wild produce, including plants and animals, etc. So therefore, you have to see there is inherent value in wild spaces. And interestingly, the same person is given charge of both Kupya as well, the forest produce as well as mines, because it is only in the mines that forests that you have to start mining material. So therefore, what comes out is that to decide whether you have to cut the forest or dig a mine, that decision comes out because he is able to regulate. So it doesn't become a mining officer decides to create a mine and cut the forest. So therefore, the relative value of both of them can be judged by a single person. And also the Dharmashastram provisions, which talk about prohibiting unnecessary harm to trees and animals. So that has to be considered. Weights and measures, of course, I will not go to it as much. Then there is the Shulkadhyaksha today, because we are talking about tariffs. And this becomes an important aspect, how to tariff and how not to tariff various projects, which are exempt from tariffs, etc. These two shlokas I will just deal with. It says, Rashtra Pidakaram Bhandam Uchindyad Aphalam Chayat Mahopakaram Uchulkam Kuryad Bijam to Durlabham. So whatever is harmful to the country, try to not let it enter the country's markets at all. Ensure that your markets are protected. And which is Mahopakarakam, which is greatly valuable, for example, medicines or other aspects like Durlabham Bijam, which is difficult to find, those can be exempt from taxes and tariffs. Similarly, Ato Navapurananam Desha Jati Charitratah Panyanam Sthapayat Chulkam Matyayam Chapakaratha. So therefore, decide on taxation, decide on tariffs based on the relative value of various products that are being dealt with. Sutradhyaksha, I will just quickly passing mention that even at the time of independence, the dream of Mahatma Gandhi, and for him this source of economic independence was the charkha. we can all associate that. And that came out of, because of there is a long-standing tradition of cottage industry, especially entirely manned by women in this country. That is, in 1947 we had that feature in our country, and that we find reflected even in the Arthashastra, where he talks about especially poor, destitute, widowed women, etc., who will otherwise find it difficult to make a meaningful living. They have to be given entire control over the yarn production in a country. So right from creating yarn, weaving, embroidery, so that is sort of in a way reserved for a particular class of people, in this case destitute women, and they get a meaningful economic activity. They produce also for the state. So the other aspects of the state's production can be freed up for other activities. And this in fact survived till recently in our country. Sita Adhyaksha about agriculture, there is and as I pointed out earlier, it is taxable, hence valuable, and there are aspects of how the agricultural activity has to be shared amongst people. So the tiller, the capital provider, the landholder, there is a share that is provided for each of them, and for the king who provides agriculture, the irrigation facilities. Then you have the Navadhyaksha, because today we talk about internal waterways, and internal waterways was an important source of transportation with our country. Just as we think about highways today, our navigable rivers were used for transporting goods, passengers, etc. Unfortunately, we have forgotten that aspect of our geography, and so there was a great amount of detail in the Navadhyaksha chapter about waterways, safety, security, how it has to be manned, etc. So Godhyaksha, because these are the various aspects of how cattle rearing have to be regulated. Nearly 8 places which are taxable, and there is a clear liability, accountability, over-exploitation of milk, etc. So there in Varsha, Sharad and Hemanta, twice milking is permitted. In Grishma, Vasanta and Shishira, only once. So therefore there is a compassionate view even to voiceless animals. And so there were milk and milk products, including cows, were all taxable, and that became a reason why the state had to keep track of these resources and provide for their well-being. So I'll close with these few insights. One is, there is definitely a great emphasis on a welfare state, reading what is there in the Arthashastra, especially in the second Adhikaranam. Efficient public administration is the key. Integrity in public administration is looked at as a primary aspect of how the state has to look at administration. Enterprise and merit amongst the population is incentivized. State is incentivized to do because it has a right to collect tax. And the ruler, or the chief executive, he identifies with the state, and so that gives him a great sense of reason or to ensure that all these facilities are provided, so that he ends up getting the best taxable revenue. And the infrastructure provided by the state, that justifies the tax. That time and again, Chanakya mentioned that if you provide decent infrastructure, you are justified in taxing these various activities. Administrators are more specialists than generalists, and this mantra, eventually I'll try to close with this. Welfare comes from wealth. Wealth comes from, so you can't have a welfare state without food. I mean, if you are, yourself a beggar, you can't talk about having a welfare state. You have to have wealth to have a welfare state. So welfare comes from wealth. Wealth comes from enterprise. Enterprise comes from a favorable environment. Favorable environment leads to taxation. So therefore, there is a mutual incentive to ensure that a state succeeds. Interestingly, I will just close with this. Agriculture and cattle rearing were not considered not taxable. So till probably the last 70 years, agriculture and cattle were in fact taxable. And that was one of the reasons we had some of the best breed of cattle in our country, because there was an incentive to ensure that there is productivity. The state would incentivize and provide for such facilities. And slowly we are losing the edge, both in cattle rearing and agriculture, because unfortunately they seem to be receiving a stepmotherly treatment, primarily because they are not revenue centers at all. I mean, it's more of a charity center that is we are dealing with. So therefore, with taxation comes attention, investment and incentive to improve the sector. So that's clearly an understanding that comes out of this. Thank you.
Focusing on public finance and economics in Kautilya's Arthasastra, really a focusing accountant. Dr. Saraswati Murali has been a very close associate of our foundation. CA article training in New Delhi with more than 30 years experience, and practicing CA for more than 30 years, and I am skipping a lot of things here, and very promising factors. Coached more than 25,000 students for CA, over the past 20 plus years with many top ranked holders among the alumni. And today's relevance is, she has a PhD in measurements in Kautilya's Arthasastra in the domains of public finance and governance, Sastra University. Lot of interest from Sanskrit, accounts and everything, very rich, richly experienced. So with this, sorry madam for cutting short your profile, I welcome her. We are very eager to hear yours.